Tonight's homework is on percentages and finding percentages of an amount. There are two crucial facts that you need to use to find percentages of amount, and the first one is to know that you can find 10% by dividing any number by 10. And once you've found 10%, you can use 10% to also work out 20%, 30%, 40% by multiplying your answer by 3, 4, 5. So to find 20%, you'd first need to find 10% and then multiply your answer by 2. So if I was finding 20% of 20, I would start off by doing 20, dividing it by 10, and 20 divided by 10 is 2. I'd then multiply my answer by 2 to give me 20%. So that's going to give me an answer of 4 altogether. And if I wanted to find 30% of 70, I would first of all find 10% of 70, which would be 7, and I'd multiply my answer by 3 to give me a final answer of 21. A second key fact of percentages is that you can find 5% by halving 10%. So if I wanted to work out what 5% of 60 was, I would start with my 60 and I'd work out 10%. So 60 divided by 10 will give me 6. I would take my answer, and this time to find 5%, I would divide it by 2, I'd halve it. So 5% of 60 is going to give me an answer of 3. This way of working comes in very handy if I need to find 35% of a number. So if I was trying to find 35% of 90, I could start by finding 10%, which would be 9. I could multiply that by 3 to give me 30%, which will be 27. I can go back to my 10%, I can halve it to give me 5%, which will be 4.5. And once I've got my 4.5, I can add that onto my 27 to give me 35% of 90 as 31.5. A third key fact on percentages is that you can find 1% of any number by dividing by 100. So 1% of 17 would be 0.17. 1% of 220 would be 2.2. All I'm doing to work these out is moving my decimal point 1 and 2 places. So my 17 becomes 0.7. If I go to my 220 and I move it 1, 2 places, you can see that it becomes 2.2. We know that from the work we've done on dividing by 10 and dividing by 100. So to find 1% of any number, I divide by 100. Once I know what 1% is, I could use that to work out 3%. Or 8%, etc. So if I needed to find 8% of 400, the first thing I would do is I could find 1%. So 1% of 400 is 400 divided by 100, which is going to be 4. Once I've got my 4, I can multiply that by 8, which is going to give my 8% as 32. This should be making many links to when you're finding fractions of an amount. We'd find 3/4 of an amount in the same way. We divide by the 4 and multiply by the 3. So in our percentages, we're finding 10% and then multiplying by the multiple of 10. So 30% would be find 10% and multiply by 3. And if we wanted to find 5%, we could take 10% and halve it. If we wanted to find 8%, we'd divide by 1 and then we'd multiply that by 8. Hopefully you can see the connection there to finding fractions of an amount. There are different ways of finding percentages of an amount, and the ones we've just looked at will work for lots and lots of you. Some of you may like to try this method instead and to make a link to the work we did on multiplying fractions. So if I take one of the questions here, we're asked to find out what 5% of 80 is. And if I start to use this in fraction terms and multiplying fractions, I need to turn my percentage into a fraction. So this 5% needs to become a fraction. That's going to become 5 over the top of 100. And that's going to get multiplied by 80, but that also needs to be turned into a fraction, so I'm going to make that over 1. So if I write that out as an equation, it's going to be 5 hundredths multiplied by 80 over 1. Once I've got that far, I can start cancelling down. So I can say that 20 goes into 80 4 times and 20 goes into 100 5 times. Now straight away I could say 5 goes into 5 once and 5 goes into 5 once, which leaves me with an answer of 4. I could check this by saying to myself, what's 10%? So dividing 80 by 10 to give me my 8, and then to get my 5% I could halve it, which will give me 4. So I can check that my method's working, but on some harder questions, some of you may find a multiplying method easier to use. So if I wanted to find 80% of 12, using my multiplying method, I'd turn my 80% into a fraction, I'd multiply, and I'd turn my 12 into a fraction. So that's what I end up with. And we know that I can multiply any top number by any bottom number. So this time I'm going to simplify with my 80. I'm going to say that 20 goes into 80 4 times and 20 goes into 100 5 times. And then I can multiply across the top and across the bottom. I can say that 4 multiplied by 12 gives me 48. And I can say that 5 multiplied by 1 gives me 5. So now I've ended up with 48 divided by 5. If I was working that out, to make sure I can work it out as a decimal and not have to get caught up in my percentages, I would set it out like so. So I'm going to say that 5 goes into 48, it goes in 9 times, 9 5s are 45, it leaves me with 3. I'm going to bring down my next digit, not forgetting to put in my decimal point. I'm going to say that 5 goes into 30, well that goes in 6 times, and 5 6s are 30, so there is nothing left over. So 80% of £12 is going to be £9.60. Please notice that if it's money, you need to take your answer and you need to understand that 9.6 is the same as £9.60. And you need to make sure that you've got two decimal places after the decimal point. Okay, my final message: to be successful on this homework, show me your thinking and your learning in your book. Please do not just write down a set of answers, then I can't help you if you've gone wrong. So learning is important. It's the whole vital point of why we bother doing any of this. So show me your learning. Let me see your thinking.